What's up guys? Welcome back to the channel and to another video. This week's video is a really special video for me because this video will be my 100th video on YouTube. And for that 100th video, I wanted to do something special. So I built this set of end tables, which is really one of the projects that got me started into woodworking, especially when I started making things for people, as well as making videos for YouTube. So in this video, I'll take you through the exact steps as to how I built these end tables. Now, the cool thing about this set of end tables is that these are built without using any fancy tools. You can build this with just a miter saw or a circular saw, a drill, and a pocket hole jig. So if you want to get into woodworking, this is a great project to start with. And if you want to make this exact set, you can check out the description of this video where I have the length of every single cut that I made, as well as a link to all the tools that I've used. So if you've been here for all 100 videos on my channel, thank you. I really appreciate it. If you're new to the channel, be sure to click that subscribe button so you won't miss out on any more content. And with all that said, let's go ahead and get started. So the frame of this table will be made with Douglas fir 2x4s. You could use whatever material you wanted, but that's what I had, so that's what I used. The first step that we'll want to do is to cut 4 pieces to equal length. These will be the legs, and then we'll take a different 2x4 and we'll cut 4 equal pieces, which will be the horizontal braces that will go in between the legs. To connect these brace pieces to the legs, I'll be drilling pocket holes on each side of the braces. And I'm using the Craig K4 pocket hole jig, which makes this a really easy process. Now, if you don't have this or you don't want to buy a jig that expensive, there is a mini pocket hole jig, which will do the exact same thing for a fraction of the price. Once those pocket holes were drilled on the end of each one of those braces, we could begin laying everything out. So this will be the side support frame of the table, and you can see here that I'm using an extra scrap piece to mark the spacing between the bottom shelf and the very bottom of the legs. And with everything laid out, we'll put a little bit of glue on each one of the legs, then clamp them in place. At this point, you want to grab a square if you have one to make sure that everything is lined up square. Then we can tilt this frame piece up on its side and we'll use regular screws in those pocket holes to attach those to the legs. Some people might recommend that you use the pocket hole screws with the flat head on the inside of the screw for this. I've found that that's really not necessary, and just using regular screws here will be fine as long as you don't oversink the screws. We obviously had to make 2 side frames since this will be a square table, and after we had both of those side frames made, it was time to attach them together. To attach them together, I cut some 2x2s to length, and then just like we did with those braces that were 2x4s earlier, we're going to put pocket holes on these 2x2s, which will allow us to use screws in those pocket holes just like we did on the other frames. I know earlier I already said that you want to use a square if you have one to make sure that everything is square, but it really is important to make sure that everything is square or as square as you can get it. If not, once you finally have everything assembled and attached together, the table can turn out a little crooked and that'll cause it to wobble, which is something that we obviously want to avoid if we can do so. Anyway, with a little bit of glue on the ends of those 2x2s, I then clamped them into place, and using screws, I secured them into their final resting spot. Considering that the screws will hold everything in place, the glue might be a little overkill, but I'd rather err on the side of too secure than not secure enough, so I opt to use both. And in no time, we have our first table frame. Okay, so the main frame of the table is complete. Now we're going to put the slats in. So to put the slats on the bottom, we use this 1x3 8-foot furring strip here. And there's a couple different ways that you can do this. So if you do not have a table saw, all you'll do is put this board on top of the braces, cut it to length in multiple sections, and then those can be attached with nails or screws. Here's what that'll look like. So here's the board laying across. Now out here you can see that it comes all the way to the edge. So if you don't have a table saw, you would just cut this board into multiple sections that long right there, and then they would go all the way across this way. Now I have a table saw, so I'm going to do this and make it look a little bit better in my opinion. So rather than put them on top of the outside pieces here and here, we'll cut that to the length in between the pieces and then tack them down on the inside. So to do that, we first needed to get the measurement between those brace pieces and then cut the 1x3 board to that length. It just so happened to work out that a 1x3 8-foot board would cut 5 slat pieces, which was about the perfect width of the slats that I needed. And to put those slats in place, we'll be using this scrap piece of tongue and groove board to rip a couple pieces off that can be used as shelves. Now, you don't have to use a tongue and groove board. You could really use any material that you have. And this is the part that you would need the table saw for. So I ripped a few strips that were 3/4 inches wide off. If you're not comfortable with ripping a board that thin, you could always use a gripper style push block, which is an awesome tool that'll keep your fingers safe and away from the blade. So all that we really have to do with these strips to turn them into shelves is to attach them into place. So you'll want to put the strip down, then put a slat on top of it and make sure it's flush with that side brace. After you have it flush and in the right spot, you can just attach it with nails. If you don't have a nail gun, you could just use glue or you could use screws as well. Here you can see how those strips turned into shelves, which will hold the slats in place. And I think that this is just a quick and easy way to lower those slats down in the bottom shelf and give it a little bit better of a look than having them set on top. That said, if they are setting on top, it's the same exact idea and that'll work perfectly fine. After using brad nails to put them in place, all we really had to do left for the main frame of the table was to make the X on each side. So this X will be made out of 2x2 boards, just like those smaller side support pieces. Now as far as the X goes, I did a full in-depth detailed video previously, kind of going over every single step that I'm doing in more detail, so I'll leave a link to that at the top of the screen. But for a quick and short version of what I'm doing here, you first want to cut 2 pieces long enough to where they'll overlap on each corner of this, clamp them into place, then you can trace the overlap of where those pieces line up with the frame. And when we cut the corners off of those pieces using those lines, it should fit perfectly down in that frame. After those corners are cut, we can line the board up, and then all we have to do is just tap it in.
Just tap it in.
Similarly to how we trace the overlap on the corners, we'll trace the overlap of where these boards meet in the middle, and then we'll cut a half lap joint out in the middle of each of them. That way they can overlap and set flush with each other once they're put in place. There's multiple ways to cut the half lap joint out, but I'll be using the trench setting on my miter saw. So if you flip that switch down, it stops the blade from going down all the way. And if we have the trench setting set to where it cuts out half of the board, then there should be close to a perfect overlap once these are cut out. So I just make multiple passes with the miter saw to cut that half lap out. Now this footage that you're seeing here is sped up quite a bit. This is not a place you want to get in a hurry, so take your time, especially when you're using the miter saw to make several passes like that. Once those cuts are made, we'll use a little bit of glue down in each side of the joint in order to hold everything in place. You can see here that they fit together very well. And in addition to this X part looking really cool, this will actually add a little bit of strength to the table as well. So we once again just tap the X into place, and then I like to use screws on the top and the bottom of the frame to secure that in place. Now one thing that you can notice with this shot, if you didn't notice it earlier, is that the pocket holes on the bottom aprons are facing down, whereas on the top, the pocket holes are facing up. So when we cover that up with the tabletop, those top pocket holes will never be seen. And also since those bottom pocket holes are facing down, they will never be seen as well. We'll keep the tabletop of this table made nice and simple. So all we're doing is taking a 1x8 board that's 6 foot long and cutting it into 3 equal sections. We'll attach this a little bit later in the video, but for right now, let's focus on painting and staining the table as well as the top. So for the paint, I grabbed my HomeRite paint sprayer, and I'm just using white latex paint here. Now I know earlier in the video I said I wouldn't be using any fancy tools, so if you don't have a paint sprayer, you can definitely use a paintbrush, which will work fine. I just have a paint sprayer and it'll save me a lot of time, so that's what I used. Next up was to stain those tabletop boards that we cut earlier, so I'm using Minwax Early American Stain here. I really like this stain, it's very easy to work with, and I just like how the color turns out overall after everything's dried. So I wiped the stain on, doing my best to go with the grain, let each of the boards set for maybe 5 or 10 minutes or so, and then come back with a paper towel to wipe any of that excess stain off. I let those set for about a day or so, and then I was able to attach those boards to the table itself. To attach these boards to the table, I'm just using screws right through the frame into those top boards. And for everyone who will say that this restricts wood movement and this cannot be done, I do agree that it does restrict wood movement, but the idea of this table is to keep it a very simple build and make this a DIY style table. In this case, in my opinion at least, screws are perfectly fine. And worst case is that there will be some small separation between the seams or a tiny crack in one of the boards on the top. If you're interested in how to put those on with Z-clips to allow for wood movement, check out the video I have linked at the top of the screen right here. And after those boards were on, all that I had left to do was to put a coat of polyurethane gloss to add a little bit of shine and some extra protection to the top. Here's a couple shots of the table right before we have a short word with the sponsor of today's video. Just kidding, there is no sponsor, so here's a final word from me. And so that's all there is to it for these tables. Now, if you have any questions about any part of the build process, drop a comment down below and I'll be sure to answer those questions for you. If you enjoyed this content, drop a comment below as well and let me know what you thought. So if you did make it this far in the video, thank you for watching. As always on my channel, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and of course, stay tuned for more.